James Bond has been an institution within cinema for almost 60 years now, and for the most part has never really missed a step. Sure, there have been some stinkers along the way, but regardless, the legendary spy always returns. Here's hoping we'll get to see No Time to Die one day. But alongside the films, there have been a fair amount of games released over the years. Some god-awful, and others went on to define a genre. The last 007 video game was released way back in 2012, though in the 30 years prior, fans have certainly had their pick of the litter, with barely a year passing without a new James Bond game hitting the stores. Now, the quality of these games has literally been all over the place, and so separating the wheat from the chaff is no easy feat. For the purpose of clarity, we'll be excluding a few entries. Oh, and yes, our bodies are ready for IO's take on James Bond. We just can't wait. With that being said, I'm Ben Roy from WhatCulture.com, and this is ranking every James Bond game from worst to best. Number 24, A View to a Kill, the computer game, 1985. Now, the film might be one of the most divisive in the series, as people either love it or hate it. Yeah, Roger Moore was getting on a bit, but Christopher Walken and Grace Jones are such an excellent sinister duo. The first two games based on A View to a Kill were developed by Dormark, which would later be acquired and transformed into Eidos Interactive. Though this absolutely naff stab at the Bond license was an embarrassment. This title touted divisive gameplay levels across 3 whole levels. That's it, 3! It was largely destroyed by the critics for its poor controls, its embarrassing abundance of bugs, and mediocre graphics. On the flip side, at least the series got its worst movie tie-in out the way first. Number 23, James Bond 007, 1983. The first ever officially licensed James Bond game was developed by Parker Brothers, which several years later would be gobbled up by Hasbro. James Bond 007 was originally released on the Atari 2600, and even drew its missions from a number of different Bond titles, namely Diamonds Are Forever, Moonraker, The Spy Who Loved Me, and For Your Eyes Only. Sadly, the gameplay was the same dull, side-scrolling shoot affair across every level, and in addition to it simply not being much fun to play, when played today it looks, frankly, ugly as sin. Well, at least it's short. Number 22, Live and Let Die, 1988. As it won't surprise many people that have played it, this speedboat-centric Bond game was actually an original IP, Aquablast, retrofitted with a 007 title and published by Dormark. Live and Let Die is a classic case of what you see is what you get. It doesn't deliver much more than the basic racing shooter, and really is just a rudimentary reskin of an old game. Shameless, really. Though they should probably revisit this at some point, right? Get Sheriff J.W. Pepper and Bond back in the driver's seat. Or, with this next entry, maybe not. Number 21, 007 Racing, 2000. Somehow not quite the worst vehicle-centric Bond game, 007 Racing is still, well, undoubtedly crap. This really was developers trying to cash in on the Bond license after the hype of GoldenEye, and well, can you blame them? Though even for the year 2000, the visuals, they weren't much to look at. While the controls are clumsy and beyond some fan service, this really isn't worth your time. Though I have to say, this was an okay rental back in the day. Number 20, James Bond 007, The Stealth Affair, 1990. Around the world, James Bond 007 Stealth Affair was known by vaguely goofy moniker Operation Stealth, but for its US release, the point-and-click adventure game was rebranded as a 007 joint, which is really funny when you look at it because Interplay made no effort to have this look like a James Bond game at all. It didn't resemble the IP in any way. In the international version, you play as John Glam, working for the CIA because reasons. It had enough charm to not be a total waste of time, and looks better than most of the low-rated games on this list. But beyond that, just forget I ever spoke about this one. Number 19, The Living Daylights, 1987. This adaptation of one of the most underappreciated Bond films is sadly no such dark horse. It's not bad though, with the publisher actually improving on the terrible A View to a Kill, released some years prior. But as you guessed it, this is a box standard meat and potatoes side-scroller, which really doesn't deliver on anything from The Living Daylights. It repeats a bunch, the visuals are middling, and occasionally controls even get in the way of the fun. A brainless yet inoffensive waste of time for sure. And yet, some of the music rocks, but it still doesn't offer enough to make it a full-fat Bond game for us. Number 18, James Bond Jr., 1991. As laughable as a concept of a video game centered around James Bond's nephew might sound, James Bond Jr. had existed since 1967, first appearing in a spin-off novel and even getting its own animated TV series. In 1992, THQ published 2 versions of James Bond Jr. for the NES and SNES respectively, the former being a puzzle platformer and the latter being a shooter. Neither version drummed up much business though, perhaps due to the mediocre visuals, gameplay and whatever the story was. Now it's certainly worth it for the morbid curiosity alone, but it's hardly a great piece of entertainment. Number 17, The Spy Who Loved Me, 1990. At the time of its release, The Spy Who Loved Me was not only one of the best Bond films, but best Bond games out there, which apparently isn't saying much. Despite being a blatant Spy Hunter ripoff, The Spy Who Loved Me delivers exactly what it promises on the tin. A dumb fun arcade shooter for anyone craving more Spy Hunter in their life. Though the combination of trashy controls and a high difficulty makes this one of the more frustrating games after a while. Number 16. James Bond 007, A View to a Kill, 1985. The second game based on A View to a Kill is thankfully much better and proves that sometimes simpler is the way to go. The text-adventure Mindscape was designed by Raymond Benson, who would later go on to work on Bond novels from 1997 to 2003, and it's certainly not a game for those craving a blast-a-thon spy romp. It does succeed thanks to its unexpectedly sharp writing. Now, of course, it was never really going to fly with today's standards, but it's worth a look. Number 15. James Bond 007, The Duel, 1993. The Duel was the final James Bond game published by Domark and was released on the Master System, Mega Drive and Game Gear in 1993. Bang in the middle of that awkward 6-year gap without a Bond movie. But now with No Time to Die, we're almost reaching those agonising lengths again. But boast solid graphics and filled the void for fans waiting for more Bond media back in that dark time. Number 14. James Bond 007, 1998. As easy as it might be to cast this one off because it was on the Game Boy back in 1998, this handheld 007 romp is actually not that bad. They're really far more of an RPG than the action games that we've come to expect. If nothing, James Bond 007 is probably one of the most unexpected games in the IP's history. Yes, the visuals were rudimentary even for 1998 standards, but between the globe-tropping on offer, the appearance of legendary villains Ob, Jobs and Jaws, Bond's first outing on the go was actually rather good. Number 13. 007 Legends, 2012. Now sadly, the latest Bond game just isn't much good, despite the nostalgic potential this one had, though it's just a cheap, lazy, thrown together mess. Which is all the more heartbreaking because this is what we wanted. We want to play through some of the older Bond films, but with new graphics and maybe the Call of Duty engine would work. Sadly, this all fell apart and it just wasn't so good. This really just felt like a reskinned Call of Duty. The levels weren't really unique and it was all about the shooting. There was nothing here, there was no extra oof that made it feel like those classic Bond films at all, other than the name and the setting. Ultimately, it's a critical and commercial failure and caused Eurocom to fire 75% of its staff, mere months after the game hit stores. Somehow, despite all this, it received a nomination for Outstanding Video Game Writing at the Writers Guild of America Awards. What the fuck? Number 12. 007 License to Kill, 1989. Somehow one of the most controversial canonical Bond films got a surprisingly solid movie tie-in game, with one of the more visually impressive outings for the spy in the early days of the Bond series. License to Kill's greatest accomplishment is its diversity. Recognising the vast variety of settings the film had, it went from a helicopter shooter, on-foot shooter, parachuter, underwater shooter, on-jet skier shooter, and finally a tanker truck showdown shooter with villain Fran Sanchez. If you know what you're doing, you can rush through this one in about 15 minutes. But even so, it goes above and beyond the odds and actually tries to represent the film in game form. And then, it's fun to play. Number 11. James Bond 007, Agent Under Fire, 2001. Though there are many who will argue that Night of Fire perfected its predecessor's formula, Agent Under Fire was the first multiplayer PlayStation Bond game actually worth a damn. But beyond that, it touted an entertainingly cinematic breezy campaign mode, complete with ludicrous driving sections. Though the multiplayer was where it was at for the most of us. I think partly because this Bond didn't have Brosnan's face or voice. He did kind of feel like a cheap knockoff. At the time, this truly felt like PS2's answer to GoldenEye. Above all this, Agent Under Fire marked a turning point in the tide for the series, which was really struggling to cement itself post-GoldenEye. But with Agent Under Fire, it succeeded. Number 10. Tomorrow Never Dies, 1999. This was the first major Bond game to release after GoldenEye 007. Tomorrow Never Dies was never going to live up to GoldenEye. And yeah, it really didn't. But it's certainly not bad, despite ditching first person for third person, and well, most criminally of all, not featuring multiplayer whatsoever. Do they realise what made GoldenEye so popular? Still, on its own merits, it's a half-decent movie tie-in, even though it released 2 years after the film hit screens. Kind of like GoldenEye, they were just on a delayed schedule back then. Now, there's nothing revolutionary about the gameplay or the graphics, but if you want to play Tomorrow Never Dies or live out the sequences within the film, this is the way to go. Number 9. 007 Quantum of Solace, 2008. Quantum of Solace may be one of the most divisive movies in the Daniel Craig era so far, but it actually made for a half-decent video game that most fans agree was a lot of fun. Quantum of Solace makes a shockingly good attempt at faithfully adapting its cinematic namesake. It even features voices from Daniel Craig, Eva Green, Judi Dench, Mads Mikkelsen, and more. Short but sweet like most FPS campaigns developed by Treyarch, it ends long before overstaying is welcome. The game's multiplayer mode remained a cult favourite until it was shut down in February 2020, well over a decade after it was released. And that's not bad. Number 8. GoldenEye Rogue Agent, 2004. Any Bond game where you don't actually play as Bond is immediately going to piss people off, but at least Rogue Agent had a neat hook. Players instead control the disgraced MI6 agent GoldenEye, who's recruited by Goldfinger to assassinate fellow Bond movie baddie Dr. No, with Scaramanga off in the shadows somewhere. Now this game doesn't slot into the existing Bond lore, but at least it's a really enjoyable spin-off. This game avoids just being another generic FPS by handing the player the GoldenEye abilities, which allow you to see through walls, hack equipment, deflect bullets, and so on. Now it's never going to be the best Bond game out there, but if you want something totally different or left field, then this is the way to go. 007, The World Is Not Enough, N64, 2000. The World Is Not Enough may not live up to the movie, but it turned out to be a rather solid game, with developers Eurocom delivering something of a spiritual successor to GoldenEye. The N64 version anyway, as the PS1 counterpart came out months later and isn't worth bothering with. Though this is the one I was lumbered with and had to rent from Blockbuster. Ah, Blockbuster. Rest in peace. The World Is Not Enough on N64 doesn't begin to reach the heights of GoldenEye, but is a very respectable attempt at capturing the same kind of vibe. Eurocom smartly don't veer far too far from Rare's lead, ensuring the moment-to-moment gameplay is a blast, while benefiting from some of the sharpest sounds and visuals on the N64 at the time. Number 6. James Bond 007 Bloodstone, 2010. The penultimate Bond game to date is one of the few to tout an original story, and as the second Bond game published by Activision, they clearly listened to the complaints from Quantum of Solace that the gameplay wasn't diverse enough. Bloodstone adds melee takedowns to the fray, as well as stealth levels. In addition to Craig and Dench lending their voices, Joss Stone makes an odd but yet surprisingly effective appearance as an MI6 agent, and even sings the game's solid banger of a theme song. While borrowing most of its gameplay systems from other better games, Bloodstone actually delivered. Sadly though, the game's poor sales resulted in the closure of Bizarre Creations, and the sequel developed by Raven Software was scrapped. Number 5. GoldenEye 007, 2010. Released in 2010 for the Wii, with an enhanced port for the PS3 and 360 coming just a year later, this glossy reimagining of the rare original GoldenEye 007 swaps out Pierce Brosnan for Daniel Craig and mostly works. As much as it might seem like it's rewriting history in an extremely cynical, brand-extending way, so much of GoldenEye's charm carries over into this highly entertaining update that it's really just tough to feel bad about. The single-player campaign was a blast, especially once you got used to the Wii controls, or if you waited for the PS3 and 360 port. And then the multiplayer was still a boatload of fun, though not quite as earth-shattering as it was back in 1997. Number 4. From Russia with Love, 2005. Now it's really easy to have a soft spot for this one, as it's basically unheard of to have a game based on a film from 1963. But EA somehow convinced Sean Connery to lend his younger likeness and even new VO for the game, though Connery's voice had notably aged. Just a bit. He fully committed to the performance and just isn't phoning it in. It was a Bond fan's dream. The game is also a rock-solid third-person shooter that doesn't just spin its wheels and live off the Sean Connery fame. And for the time in 2005, it was certainly above average, especially when you look at movie tie-ins. It's also one of the few Bond games that manages to be challenging but yet fun. It wasn't just difficult for the sake of it, and thankfully not just a soulless cakewalk over. Number 3. James Bond 007 Nightfire, 2005. Now despite releasing alongside one of the worst Bond films of all time, Die Another Day, which was sadly Brosnan's swan song for Bond. Nightfire though is a major high point for 007 games, and a very impressive follow-up to Agent Under Fire. If this was just my personal favourites list, this might be number 1. Growing up, it was the GoldenEye for the PS2, and that's not putting it lightly. Nightfire's campaign doesn't run too long either, but it's pretty much all prime material. No time is wasted here, and every moment of the campaign works. The only thing this one was missing was Brosnan's voice. We had his face now, but just no voice. But when speaking about Nightfire, you have to hand it to the 4-player split screen. They really recreated the GoldenEye magic here with Nightfire. But of course, remember, don't let anyone pick up job. And it's actually quite astonishing how EA could top themselves after this one. Number 2. James Bond 007, Everything or Nothing, 2003. 2003's Everything or Nothing was a truly great Bond game. It was a ludicrous dynamic of third-person shooting which incorporated every Bond gameplay trope in the book, and it really just had a ton of fun with it. The game's cast included not only Pierce Brosnan, Judi Dench and John Cleese in the focus roles, but the late Richard Kiel was here returning as Jaws, and even the likes of Willem Dafoe turned up, playing the big bad for this one. And then there was the song. That was a banger. The campaign is ridiculous in the best scenes, and every facet of it drips with quality. They really took the time to get this one right. If so many Bond games just feel like a hollow contractual obligation, Everything or Nothing happens to be the most creative thing to come out of the IP in years. There was pure love put into this one, and they brought back Jaws of all things. You know they knew what the fans wanted. The game was so good that this was Brosnan's true swan song. He really should have got a 5th movie and be allowed to make up for Die Another Day. Number 1. GoldenEye 007, 1997. Was anything else ever going to be number 1? Its legacy and influence in the genre just cannot be denied, especially in the console space. But just beyond mere respect, just about anyone who owned the game, or had a friend that did, or like me had a cousin that did, put countless hours into it. That multiplayer was just perfect. It was unforgettable and untouchable at the time, even though it shared a system with Glover and Buck Bumble, 2 classics that we still need back. In terms of levels though, Facility had to take the cake. Now I know Archive is almost as good, but Facility, that was the one, especially as it devolved into proximity mine fights in the toilet. Seriously, very little comes close to this. Oh and yes, the campaign is actually fantastic. It still holds up today, just once you get used to it after a few minutes. From the opening missions, which are still some of the best levels in first-person shooting history, to the latter ones when you control a tank. They all make up for having to deal with Natalia. Poor Natalia, one day she'll get better AI. And that's our list. That's every James Bond video game ranked from worst to best. Well, the ones that matter anyway. What do you think? Do you disagree with number 1? Should Everything or Nothing be the best? Nightfire? Or maybe License to Kill? Who knows? Let me know down in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And while you're still hanging around, go and follow us on Twitter at WC Gaming and follow me at Ben Roy Turner. And until next time, I just want to take a moment to honour the very first Bond, Sean Connery. Rest in peace.